emergency for the first time in about...
This is Jim, and
Receiving this message. We are Ken Jennings and John Roderick. We speak to you from our present, which we can only assume is your distant past, the turbulent time that was the early 21st century.
Fearing the great cataclysm that will surely befall our civilization, we began this monumental reference of strange and obscure human knowledge. These recordings represent our attempt to compile and preserve wonders and esoterica that would otherwise be lost.
So whether you're listening from an advanced civilization or have just reinvented the technology to decrypt our transmissions, this is our legacy to you.
This is our time capsule. This is the Omnibus.
You have accessed entry 810.LK2129, certificate number 46162. Mother Trees.
Would you say that you and I have a symbiotic relationship? Is there symbiosis?
This would mean that you and I each rely upon the other, but benefit by the relationship overall. Right?
Well, that would be a mutualistic symbiosis. There can also be a parasitic symbiosis.
Oh, symbiosis can be the good kind or the bad kind.
I think, yeah.
So parasitics on the table?
I think.
Yes, then we definitely have symbiosis. Woo!
We're like one of those situations where like a giant jungle cat has a little bird on its back picking snails off of it.
Yes, and I appreciate when you do that for me.
Yeah. Just getting those snails off of your...
They're all stuck on there.
Yeah. What are they doing?
You're
cat snails.
You're the little cleaner fish brushing the algae off my teeth because it's delicious to you.
No, I'm stuck on your side, just sucking your blood.
I'm sure you think of yourself as whatever the majestic California condor is.
I truly am a majestic, not a condor, blarf.
Because they're all buzzardy?
Yeah, no, I'm the majestic alpine moose, the forest moose.
Sailing above the hills.
Mm-hmm. The flying moose.
And I'm the little bird in your antlers that enjoys getting the view from up there.
Yes. A nice place to sit and rest.
John, tell me about...
And pick the mites out of your feathers.
Tell me about Yngwie Malmsteen. I need your elevated viewpoint.
Yeah, well, I feel like symbiosis is a thing. When did you first encounter the concept of mutual interdependency? Do you feel like it happened in science class?
I feel like maybe by watching my toxic family members. No, I'm kidding, of course.
To all the Jennings who listen... You are beloved.
Enjoy these codependency jokes. My dad did just text me the other night, and he's like, "Hey, speaking of the Batavia, I actually saw the replica in the early '90s when they were building it in the Netherlands."
Oh, he was listening to the show,
and I was like, first of all, you're listening to the show. Second of all, cool, but also,
hi, Ken Jennings Sr.
They could be listening right now. The walls have ears. No, I would say it was probably, I believe it's a bio class
right.
thing where you learn, here are the different kinds of relationships, here are the examples. This one's detrimental to one, but helpful to the other. This one's neutral to one, helpful to the other. But I think around the same time, there was also a Star Trek The Next Generation episode that covered different kinds of symbiosis.
Okay.
So it's really not clear which would have stuck in my mind more.
I think I learned it in science class before Star Trek The Next Generation was even a twinkle in Gene Roddenberry's eye.
You're so old.
I know, I really am.
You have pre-Wil Wheaton knowledge
I really
of this stuff. This is so everything in this episode will be pre-Wheaton era.
No, well, no, not at all. I mean,
good. I want some post-Wheaton science here.
I have pre-Wil Wheaton science. I have a lot of post-Wil Wheaton, and I also have concurrent Wil Wheaton
like
knowledge.
Stuff that he told you. Like he just walked up to you once and was like, the great red spot on Jupiter is larger than the diameter of the Earth, and just walked away.
Oh, if I could write a book about all the things that Wil Wheaton has taught me in my short life.
You could ghostwrite it for him. And he could make a ton of money.
Yeah. I'll just put his name on the cover and his picture on the cover, and I'll sell it online.
Everything I needed to know, I learned from Wesley Crusher.
I spend a lot of time, as you know, in my forest and in my garden.
Yes. You have a ravine.
I'm often gardening and also foresting.
Tell me, you're planting new trees.
Yeah, I'm
getting rid of the invasive ones.
I'm putting new trees. I'm taking away the invasives, and I'm trying to duplicate a native forest, a rhizosphere. No, I'm trying to develop a rhizosphere as part of restoring a forest habitat.
Now, as a famously smart person, of course, I know what a rhizosphere is, but can you just refresh my memory as if for the other people listening who might not know?
Just explain it to you like a 5-year-old?
Pretend obviously I know, but pretend I don't, and hook us all up.
The rhizosphere is the subsurface environment around a tree. It includes all of its root structure, all of the kind of all the bugs and the bacteria and everything that's under down in the world of roots and vegetables.
I guess that's what a rhizome is, kind of like a root stem of a plant. So that must be the root for
the roots.
For roots.
For the roots.
It's the roots.
So in my ravine, I've got all these mature trees, but a lot of the understory was overwhelmed by introduced ivy,
which often happens in the Northwest.
It does.
You're going to have blackberries, and you're going to have that Scotch broom stuff, and you're going to have all this tangling, awful ivy.
One of the things about the Pacific Northwest is that a lot of stuff will grow here. It does get cold 1 week a year, and that cold often will cause some die-off of tropical plants. But a lot of stuff that
hardy stragglers will remain.
Boy, they really do take off. So I've gone out into the native forests of Washington and just tried to get an understanding of what do they look like. But of course, a lot of our best native forests were logged many decades ago and continue to be logged.
No longer OG.
And there are very few forests here that weren't logged at one point. But including, I think, my ravine, 120 years ago.
Who was out logging your ravine?
Well, it was between hither and thither, and it was there's some trees here. It's just it's a little steep there, and a lot of times the loggers leave some trees that they can't get to.
Lazy loggers, am I right? If you really hate the earth, let's clear cut that bitch, including the steep parts.
Yes.
Am I right, Paul Bunyan? Get it together.
So there are some trees on my property that are 90 years old. But what's missing is the kind of growing understory.
Do you wish you had a nurse log?
Well, I do have nurse logs.
You have nurse logs.
I do. I have nurse logs.
That's a real part of Northwest primary education and explanatory placards on trails.
Yeah, there's a lot of different, there's the nurse log, and then there's the
sexy nurse log
for
Halloween.
That's right. There's the old nurse ratchet log, which is less fun. But recently, there's been a lot of science around the study of the kind of interdependence of natural systems. Right? We long ago started to understand that if you put DDT on your crops, it's going to get into the condor eggs, and the condor eggs are going to not hatch condors.
How old do you think this knowledge goes? That life is a vast web. That's not it's common sense to us today. We certainly didn't act as if it were the case.
Well, what's interesting is that Darwin had a lot of that. He wrote quite a bit about the kind of interconnectedness,
complexity of the connections,
because that's sort of maybe one of the most profound conclusions of his work is Well, it's not just interesting because of these individual species. It's interesting because this reflects a whole biosphere.
And it's in the state where, in the same sense that invisible natural forces are producing selection, it's also kind of producing, in effect, an equilibrium where all these different competing forces produce the natural world we see.
And that was less popular, as I think is evident by what we associate Darwin with. But people were doing this this kind of research in the 19th century. And, there was an understanding that trees were interdependent. In the 19th century, they weren't able to trace super rare carbon isotopes as they made their way through interconnected networks of plant life. So they could only investigate what they could see, but there was a lot of theorizing about some of the stuff that now the science demonstrates to a much greater extent than was imagined.
And on the macro level, I'm sure you could see the eels sucking off the. I was about to say the eels sucking off the other fish. You could definitely see that. I mean, whatever they
go on the internet, Rule 34.
There's stuff like that is happening on a visible level. A naturalist could see the bird that uses the other bird's nest to get ahead with their own young, or not all of this. Do you have to follow a chain of hydrocarbon molecules?
Yeah, and I think even a more complex understanding of plant life and its interdependence on other plants.
You could see mushrooms growing on trees.
Exactly.
Right?
It was all kind of theorized back in the 1870s. A Polish scientist by the name of Franciszek Kamiński was already kind of laying out the groundwork for some of this science, and his research was followed up by Albert Frank, who actually coined a term we're going to use a lot on this episode, which is mycorrhiza.
Mycorrhiza,
which is an interdependence of trees and crops, really the vast majority of plant life.
Any plant.
An interdependence with fungi that actually bond with the tree or with the plant life underground and become a part of the network, but both supporting the individual tree and also as almost a neuronal network that connects trees to one another and then ultimately like all the trees.
Wait, so how early was this? I mean, I'm kind of shaky on the science myself. So apparently there's a web of fungus that connects a bunch of other flora together, such that they can know about each other and act in concert. Is this happening at a microscopic level, or are these like mushroomy things you can see? Or like how is this? This was known in the 19th century?
Well, the presence of fungus as a part of the underground root structure of trees was observed, and it was speculated that the fungus it was not just parasitic, but played a mutualistic role in the health and life of the tree. But it wasn't until fairly recently that a more complete understanding of how all of these trees and plants were all interconnected with one another. We talk a lot about the sentient aspen of the future, who are listeners and
in many cases Patreon supporters.
Yeah, hopefully Patreon supporters. And the aspen that we think of as and that we've discovered is the largest single organism on Earth.
Right. Sometimes whole groves of aspen are just basically one tree.
They're all one tree, and in a way, a very ancient organism as well. The largest one is called Pando. The trembling giant, which is this. I
like how he's a Japanese monster.
Pando.
No, Pando is coming.
And
Godzilla will save us from Pando.
it's in Utah. You want to think that it's going to be in Colorado because they coined they trademarked aspen, but no, it's actually over the mountains.
Yeah, I've seen a bunch of aspens in the Utah canyons.
But that is a different kind of thing. That actually is a single organism, and all the trees that you see sticking out of the ground are just clones. They're all
You're basically seeing different stems.
yeah, they're all
It's like a stalk of broccoli or
like
something.
clonal male sprouts.
Whoa.
Right.
So super gay.
Yes, that's right. It is Pando is the quaking.
Queer icon. Queer quaking quixotic icon. Thank you, Aspens. Representation matters.
This mycorrhizal symbiosis is a process or is a relation between individual trees
Of different species?
of different species.
Whoa.
And also of the same species. So a lot of the research and the star of today's show is a Pacific Northwest scientist, a Canadian, but we include the west coast of Canada in our Pacific Northwest biome.
We enjoy Cascadia.
That's right.
Not all its Blue Jays fans, but many of its scientists.
Yes, and we speak mostly the same language. A British Columbia scientist of forestry by the name of Suzanne Simard, who teaches at the University of British Columbia, but who got her forest science PhD at Oregon State. So she obviously speaks American too.
Honorary beaver.
Who grew up as like in a forestry family, in a family of lumberjacks, but who over time, and because she lived in the forests of British Columbia, developed a curiosity and then over time an expertise in the way forests are structured socially, I guess.
Oh, this is crazy. I just looked her up and I realized I saw her speak last year. I was at an event with her where she was sharing her findings about the holistic forest.
Really? Was it Campfire with Jeff Bezos?
I can't really remember or say. It was some kind of weekend retreat that might have speakers.
She's very front and center right now. She's given several TED Talks. She actually has been fictionalized in 2018's Pulitzer Prize winning novel, The Overstory. She became
there's a Canadian Simard-like scientist.
Yeah, a fictional character by the name of Patricia Wellerford. And I didn't read The Overstory, and it's
I have not. It's a Redwood Steinberg. Oh, I've seen this book.
It's by Richard Powers.
Yes, I've seen this.
And every once in a while you get sucked into a season of episodic television where you're like, how did this get made? It's about a tree scientist. And I don't know how, I guess that's the kind of novel that wins the Pulitzer these days.
I like novels like that where you can tell there's like some intensely researched angle where the author really takes you into a world, in this case, forest science, that you don't know anything about, and then kind of imagines their personal lives.
Yeah, but there doesn't seem to be like a murder at the center of it or a heist. And if there's not a murder or a heist,
let me explain to you literary fiction. What if it's a complicated mother-daughter relationship or?
But in this case, it's a mother-daughter relationship between trees.
It's even better.
What Dr. Simard discovered was that, and we're going to be talking about some of the trees here in the Pacific Northwest, but this is true of plant life around the world. In fact, it seems like 95% of all plants are mycorrhizal. And it's estimated over 20,000 different varieties of fungus that provide this service.
I feel like we should be saluting the heroic fungus.
Thank you, fungus, for your service.
Is it the kind of thing where the trees couldn't survive in their current form without them? Or does it just, help them thrive or take advantage or
Well,
would the whole thing fall apart without the myco part?
it is essential to a healthy forest. Now, you could plant a fir tree in some sanitized soil that is completely without the fungal mycelium that performs this role, and the fir tree would grow. But and you see in forests that have been clear cut.
That's what I was wondering. When stuff gets replanted in rows in these managed forests,
I think in those cases the mycelium is still under there, kind of waiting for new trees.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So that can come back and rebuild the understory and.
But you can't. I mean, you can grow a fir tree in a pot.
Yes. But he'll be sad. He'll be like, "Where's my fungi? I once heard the echoes of the other trees. Now I hear nothing."
They do a lot of different things. It's kind of amazing the degree of symbiosis. And once this effect was understood, it's not archaeology. What would be the study of ancient plants?
Sometimes they just say like paleobiology or
Yeah,
paleobotany, probably.
I like that. Paleobotany has determined that really the symbiosis between fungi and plant life goes all the way back to the first plants coming out of, the first plants that walked up out of the ocean and grew legs and became ents.
The relationship started then and was actually built up from the ground floor.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a later, a billion years later, the fungi arrived.
No, it's kind of intrinsic to how plants thrive. In addition to electrolytes is what plants crave. And then mycelium is what helps them thrive.
I feel like as recently as when I was in high school, we understood fungi to be plants. They were part of the plant kingdom. And I think now it's not usually taxonomized like that. Now there's plantae, which is, flowering plants and gymnosperms and all the rest. And then there's fungi, which are doing their own thing. And we think of them as plants because you put them on salad. But it turns out that's not how taxonomy works.
Well, and then there's moss, which is a third category that no one's entirely sure.
Moss may or may not be
what's going on with moss.
Moss may or may not be a plant.
Moss is some kind of plant, but it's not. I think
it's also a vibe, so it's hard to say.
I think moss.
Linnaeus should have just used vibes.
When we say 95% of all plants are mycorrhizal, I think maybe moss and fungus are among us.
They are,
but I'm not sure
in the Northwest.
I'm not sure what their relationship is because moss doesn't grow in the soil. If you had fungus and then moss on top of it, that feels like
it's true.
It's starting to be.
You think moss is doing its own thing? It's not part of the. It's like got its own little corporate intranet, whereas the mycorrhizal system is running its own global.
Yeah, one of these kids is doing its own thing. One of these kids,
not the same.
I know that this is one of those episodes. Whenever I do a science episode, it seems like the actual scientists who listen to the show really come out of the woodwork
to appreciate you and salute you.
And I know that
your popularization work.
I know there are a lot of biologists and a lot of plant scientists who are listening to the show who are really, really dancing around like they have to go to the bathroom wherever they are. They're bouncing around in the seat of their very efficient eco car because they want to help me so much. They want to say so many things.
Well, the impression I got listening to some artists that the conclusions were just so astounding and beyond what I would have thought of as mainstream science that I wondered if I was actually hearing some kind of new age woo-woo thing or if this was actually going to prove to be a breakthrough in understanding how forests work. And I assume it's the second, but the conclusions are just baffling and paradigm breaking.
One of the things about woo as a subculture in America is
let's dissect woo.
Is that woo often seizes upon actual science and then just sort of I'm not going to say misapplies, but but
Improves it.
takes actual science and then
Makes it better.
Yeah.
Adds Smurfs.
Adds it to a cosmology.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you'll hear something like this, like the trees talk to each other, and there will be a woo interpretation.
They're sad that we're cutting them down.
Exactly. Trees are intelligent. Trees are conscious.
Well, what can we say? What is the information that's being passed?
Well, in a way, trees are intelligent and conscious.
Oh.
Suzanne,
The woo's coming from inside the house.
Suzanne Simard actually uses the word intelligent, although, like a lot of scientists, when
she could probably do a crossword puzzle faster than a sycamore.
Yeah, exactly. Well, but I think when the interviewer goes intelligent and puts the mic back in her face,
You're right.
She's like, well, I say intelligent. I don't mean that they are. They're not trying to communicate with us, but they are communicating with each other.
A funny thing about celebrity culture is that anybody answering a question is made to look in the headline as if they had made an announcement.
Right.
It's like Daniel Radcliffe says, don't put mustard on it. Well, why would he call a press conference? No, he didn't.
Why does he care?
Some bonehead reporter asked the poor guy a question and he was like, sure. And then it's like, well, okay. So
the headline of her research was specifically or kind of interestingly, a symbiotic relationship between fir trees and birch trees, who you would think
would be enemies.
Enemies and also competitors. But
it turns out they're super into each other and are going to produce little birch tree offsprings.
Birch trees. No, they are super into each other. And you when you look at a forest as it's kind of the understory of a forest as it is making its way in the world today, it takes everything they've got. I don't know why I'm doing all of these pop culture things. I should stop.
It's not your brand.
But you would think that birch trees and fir trees were competing for limited resources.
Right.
But really, birch trees and fir trees need different things at different times of the year. Trees use photosynthesis to create sugars, and they sequester carbon, but trees need carbon and sugar at different times. So birch trees...
Like different times of the year?
Yeah, birch trees during the summer are in full leaf.
Just like me.
And that's right. Although I'm more of an autumn tree.
Is that true?
I'm more of a fir and you're more of a birch.
The fir trees are like hot Christian girl autumn?
Mm-hmm. The firs are producing a lot of sugar and carbon during the winter when birch trees are without the ability to make food for themselves. And the firs, it turns out, are actually sharing that material, sharing that nutrition with the birches as they are in, root growing hibernation, right? But trees grow their roots, plants grow their roots in the winter, and then, produce leaves and produce growth above ground during the summer. And
I'm with you so far.
The fir trees are feeding the birch because in the summer, the birch return the favor.
And this is actual nutrients are in effect being passed back and forth subterraneanly.
Right. Nutrients and also other information besides. Like birch trees are actually working to shade the seedlings of fir trees in the summer, and the firs actually know the difference underground between firs that are seedlings of themselves and their family and other firs that are less related to theirs.
Whoa, there's an incest taboo for fir trees.
There's like they're fir families. And the fungus is both acting as a media of communication. Like the information is traveling.
The tree gets a chemical and is like, I know what to do with this chemical. It's telling me that there's a fir seedling nearby that needs shade, or like it's that kind of a thing.
Yes, the
Wow.
trees are sending out stuff, and it is directed. It's not just splooged into the earth to be gathered by whomever.
Well, that's a relief.
It's making its rounds, and the fungus is acting in several different ways. There is fungus that is what they call extracellular fungus, or ectomycorrhizic fungus, where any one tree might have as many as 15 different fungi like
15
actually
different species of fungi
doing
different kinds of systems,
interconnected with its roots, and providing a kind of the fungi is much thinner and finer than the tree roots can be, right? The smallest roots send out little hairs, but the fungus can act as an amplifier of that stuff to gather water, to gather phosphorus, to take the nutrient from the soil and actually deposit it onto the roots in a way that the roots couldn't do. And it enables trees to live in soil where the nutrients are more locked up, like clay soil. It's really hard to get just chemically break the nutrients down in a way a tree could use it. But the fungus is the intermediary.
Is there some evolutionary advantage for the fungus in having a nice healthy tree there? Like it can take material from the tree?
Yeah, well, the fungus
as the tree decomposes, or
the fungus brings the water and the iron and the chemicals that the tree needs to grow, and the tree returns the favor in the form of sugar and carbon. So it helps the fungus then become.
The fungus eats that.
Yeah, the fungus. Well, and the fungus also. So then is also biologically breaking down the leaf litter and which then it converts into chemicals. There's evidence that do you know what a springtail is?
I don't.
A springtail is like a little tiny bug, like a little lobster that lives under the forest.
Is that how you think of bugs? A little lobster that lives under the forest.
It's a little lobster, and I think the springtail is one of the...
Oh, it's like a hexapod.
Yeah, it's one of the most prevalent animals on the earth. It's, and
they're not insects, interestingly, even though they have...
Yeah, right. They
have 6 legs, but they're their own little evolutionary line.
They've got a lot of... They've got like 6 segments. They're very... they're unusual little creatures, and they are... If you take a square meter of dirt, it's got 100,000 of these little hexapods in it that are all, working away.
Doing their thing invisibly.
Chugging.
But importantly.
They're very small. And there's evidence that that this mycelium will actually extrude chemicals that attract springtails and then kill them.
Whoa, slave labor?
And then the dead springtails bring nitrogen to the tree roots. And some trees are getting upward of a quarter of their nitrogen from dead springtails that are being murdered by their symbiotic mycelium.
Many Bothans died to bring us this information.
Now, there's another kind of fungus that works in a different way, the endomycorrhiza, which actually sends its little tendrils into the membrane of the cells of the
tree root cells?
The roots of the tree, and become kind of, and this is the more prevalent of the two, becomes essentially part of the tree.
This is basically when they're having sex.
This
when
is
the
how
tree and the fungus are having sex.
So this is how trees And this is also how trees have sex with each other. So, which brings us to the mother tree, which is a concept that Dr. Simard has maybe discovered, certainly promoted,
Pioneered.
which is the idea that underground you can see the connections between all these different trees, both of the same species and of different species. But they're in any area of land, there's going to be one tree that has the greatest number of connections. And
Just by definition, or is it important that there's kind of essentially one, in the same way that there's a queen bee, that there's a queen tree?
it is a queen tree.
Ooh.
And the queen tree is kind of is part of a system of resource allocation and distribution.
It has responsibilities that the other trees don't?
Well, or it is at the center of a hub that, for instance, if a tree is suddenly attacked by aphids, that tree will send a signal that it is under siege, and the mother tree will direct some volatile organic compounds, or VOCs or VOCs,
Love to get some VOCs from my mother tree.
that both help that tree combat aphids, and also that those compounds will go out to neighboring trees in order to help them protect against. And what some of them do is actually attract predators
That'll eat the
will
aphids.
eat the aphids.
So sometimes it's stuff the aphids don't like to smell. Sometimes it's stuff that the ladybug or bird that eats the aphids will love to smell.
Right.
That tree is giving perfume to its bestie.
Yes. And
That's a gift.
it does sound at this point almost indistinguishable from woo. And for futurelings that, well, I'm assuming that all futurelings are living in a world that is entirely woo, right? Because woo is the only true way of seeing the earth. It's all connected to yoga and vegetarianism and anti-vax QAnoning, but also yoga and self-care. And in the case of the people I know, a lot of spa visits.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta drink those green shakes, or you're gonna have toxins.
And books that you can
The green
get in,
shakes get rid of the toxins.
like airport bookstores, a lot of stuff like that. And I'm assuming it is the governing religion and also form of government of futurelings. But for people in the intermediary times, woo is, what would you call it? A sort of a comparative religion hodgepodge of like, take one from column A, one from column B, but
Yeah, and it's not internally consistent between its followers even.
yeah, but with an idea that there's a holistic truth that if you can unlock it, you see the interconnectedness of all things. And I think in some ways, like the human-centric manifestation that people can do as spiritual animals to create both a sort of prosperity gospel.
Yeah, woo is reassuring. Woo is never like, you're one of billions of lonely organisms on a speck of dust hurtling through the endless night. Woo often tells
which is
you.
how I feel.
Woo often tells you, science actually says you're special.
Yeah.
If you look at the right science the right way.
Yeah, it's the spooky action at a distance where a lot of us
There
are
it
like,
is.
whoa, how did these atoms align with each other? How spooky. And the woo take is like, no, it's not spooky. It's indicative of.
Well, it seems like Dr. Simard is suggesting actual chemical level interactions
Absolutely.
that explain woo. She's going to give us the equations of woo.
Well, but this is the trick with woo, because woo can co-opt science really easily. So yes, the more explaining of woo you do, the more it empowers woo.
But then it ceases to become woo because now it's an equation.
Well, so in this case, there are two schools of thought, right? One is the kind of no compromise in defense of Mother Earth school of thought, which is these are sentient creatures. This is a biosphere, and we cannot, if you go to a forest in Germany those forests are completely managed. They're monoculture forests. The understory is cleared so that they can get in there with their little tractors. The trees are planted in rows. They're all one species and they're all one age. And that is not how forests actually work. But there's also a lot of interest in this from the logging community, because the evidence shows that if you leave the mother tree, you can cut down all the trees around her and she'll be bummed, but she
the
and
forest
her
will heal faster.
Yeah, she and her network of mycelium and roots and just her colonization of the ground, her rhizosphere, makes it much easier to regrow the forest. And it's cutting down the mother tree that breaks the network, breaks the cycle. So you can go a lot of different directions with this information.
It's an interesting philosophical question. I feel like this has come up in Omnibus before, maybe when we talked about Plantasia and the 70s fad for plant sentience. It's just, at what point this system that becomes so complicated that it looks neuronal, that it seems to have analogs to the way intelligence works, at what point do you actually just throw up your hands and say, well, they might as well be sentient? Like, the complexity is such that these might not be analogous to drives and thoughts and will, but what if it actually is drives and thoughts and will?
Yeah, and
coming from different parts of the forest.
You can extrapolate the other direction, which is, is the Earth a biosphere and we are performing some role in it that maybe we got out of control? We are the blackberries.
That's not woo.
But it also, there are lots of cases you could make that that our system of roads and internet is just a neural network that is now turning the planet into a giant Death Star, which we will use to kill other planets. And maybe that's the whole purpose of the universe.
And it gives me a sense of well-being to know that I have such a purpose.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter how fulfilled I feel on a daily basis. It doesn't matter if I'm a data packet in this great internet that's being created.
Exactly.
Just by going to the store or doing a bank transfer, I'm helping.
Once the hollow moon crashes into the Earth and we realize that all we have to do is put ramjets on one side of the Earth, we cover the Sahara with jets,
so that we can,
and then we start
blast the other way.
Yeah, then we start moving the Earth around, and we don't have to put spaceships out there. We can just drive the Earth to Mars.
If the jets are on Africa, I just want to look at an antipodal map of Earth and see what part of Earth is the cockpit of spaceship Earth at this point. Directly opposite the Sahara is, well, it's
Siberia, right?
It's basically, no, it's
Denmark?
No, it's the middle of the Indian Ocean. It's like halfway between Madagascar and Australia.
Oh,
so
I see.
You'd have to build an island due south of India that becomes the cockpit of Earth. No, wait, that can't be right.
Maybe that's where that Malaysian Airlines airplane went down right there.
It's the Pacific. I'm wrong. It's like Polynesia. It's Polynesia. That makes more sense.
That's a nicer place to have a cockpit Earth.
Yeah, you just put your cockpit just northeast of New Zealand and you run the whole place from there. So if we're talking about mother trees, is there a way for me to look at a forest and know what the mother tree is? It's not always going to be the oldest tree or the fanciest tree.
No, it's not always the oldest tree. And I think that if you were looking at this from a forest products sense, there would need to be some, I think, and this may be, the forestry isn't always the most progressive industry, although if you go up to Mount St. Helens, Weyerhaeuser has built a museum there that competes with the Mount St. Helens Museum.
It's nicer and better funded, which is a bummer. I've been to both, I believe.
Yeah, I have been to both too, and the Weyerhaeuser one is like, wow, it's nice in here. This doesn't have like 1980s government bathrooms.
It's not made of blocks of government cheese, but it also has a lot of exhibits about how important it is to cut down all the trees every 80 years.
And how great Weyerhaeuser is at it and what a great service they're doing for the world. But I think that if they extend that mentality to their process, they will develop the science to go into these rhizomes or rhizospheres and maybe be able to determine, because the thing about these, if you take 45 trees that are all connected to one mother tree,
Mm-hmm.
they're not living in isolation from the other, the trees that are their neighbors. I think the limits of the study are how far this radioactive iodine can go out and indicate a network. But I imagine all these networks, like neurons, are interconnected with one another. And so mother trees are at a distance communicating with other mother trees or overlapping with them. And the ability, I think what you would end up doing is saying, we just leave the biggest trees, or we leave one big tree every quarter of an acre. That is against the clear-cut model for sure. But it and then
the clear-cut model is just efficient. It's not.
Yeah,
it's
right.
not environmentally advantageous in any way. I mean, I'm sure if you cared about the environment, you would carefully thin out trees, but leave enough of a canopy for all the species and blah blah blah. And nobody does that.
But what you see is also that they clear the birches out. That they think that what the birch trees are doing is getting in the way of growing more firs, when in fact the birch are part of the nurturing process for young firs.
So the mother tree actually literally is a mother. It's
a big mama.
That's right.
It's the mama bear.
It's raising all the baby trees.
What's interesting is that Dr. Simard is also sort of promulgating a philosophy of science within universities. I remember years ago, I went to Stanford as part of an ultimate tournament. And I was talking to some student at Stanford who told me this anecdote, and I have no idea whether this is true. This just sounds like the kind of baloney that Stanford students say on airplanes in order to sound interesting. This was before that Stanford became a tech universe, back when it was really known for its ultimate Frisbee teams.
It was just Frisbee, nothing else. You could major in Frisbee scholarship.
But they told me this story about how the different science disciplines all had their own lunchrooms. Like there was the biology department lunchroom, and then over here there was the engineering lunchroom. And they were doing some improvement on the campus, and they had to close a couple of lunchrooms, and the engineers had to have lunch in the biology lunchroom. And in the course of whatever I know, the course of, there was only grilled cheese sandwiches in the engineering lunchroom because they had never developed a sense of taste.
Yeah, usually this is when you're like, wait, these guys have been getting the big chocolate chip cookies all this time?
The biologists were eating these incredible, moss sandwiches.
Quinoa.
But just sitting at the same table at lunch produced all of this, collaborative energy.
Cross-pollination of ideas.
Yeah, where somebody was like, well, what are you working on? Well, I'm working on this, that, and the other. And all of a sudden they were like, that's what I'm working on. And so Suzanne Simard is trying to promote that as a kind of a philosophy of the communication of the sciences. And she calls it the Terra Web, not Terra, but Terra Web.
Wait, with people or plants?
With people.
Okay. She wants a mother tree-like forest vibe.
She wants
in the sciences.
A forest vibe in the sciences.
What are the little funguses that crawl between the engineers and the big pharma guys or whatever?
Comparative
emails?
Literature majors.
Yeah, exactly. All the humanities majors.
No, you know what? There's no other use for communications majors. Maybe that's what they're good for.
Well, they did such a good job playing on the basketball team or the lacrosse team. But what do we do with the rest of their life cycle?
Let them be the voice between the different sciences.
Bring me some volatile compounds, communications major. I have aphids. And that concludes Mother Trees, entry 810.LK2129, certificate number 46162 in the omnibus. The data packets that John and I exchanged in our era did not tend to go through fungal soil. They were often on social media platforms, unfortunately, at Ken Jennings, at John Roderick, at Omnibus Project. Our analog sentient aspens of your hydrocarbons were emails that we would receive at theomnibusproject@gmail.com. You could send us physical items. This would be like our leaf litter to P.O. Box 55744, Shoreline, Washington. I'm going to open something right now from Laurelus in Albany. Am I saying that right? Laurelus? Laurelese? We may never know because unless it comes with a punctuation guide. When I open it, I guess I shouldn't talk about this. This is a birthday card we need to sign. By the time this airs, I think the recipient will have already received this birthday card that I said we would sign for an Omnibus listener. So apparently I should not advertise this service on the show, but you and I are going to very kindly sign this card. But here's the thing.
Yes. Did they send a self-addressed stamped envelope? They
did, but they also said, hey, don't worry if you can't get it to me before his birthday on November 2nd. Guess what day we are recording this show?
So wait a minute. We should say happy birthday right now because this won't air for if we send that out today or tomorrow.
That's true, but by the time our recipient hears it, hopefully he would have received this already.
And already had a birthday. So yes. Happy birthday, recipient. Who is it?
Steve. There we go. I was like, it's got to be on the letter somewhere.
Steve. Happy birthday, Steve. Sorry we didn't get it to you sooner.
I hope you enjoyed the card. It's confusing when I open the mail and it turns out to be mail from myself. This was a real existential crisis for me. I opened the mail and it turned out to be something we're supposed to send.
Oh, yeah.
Not something we're supposed to receive. But you can send us actual things and not just things you want sent back to you to P.O. Box 55744, Shoreline, Washington 98155. You can find your fellow futurelings online, make your own little, what was it called? A rhizosphere?
Rhizosphere.
On Facebook or Discord or Reddit. I believe there are futurelings groups on all of the above. The best way to support the show is to go to patreon.com/omnibusproject right now when your heart is full of woo and love for the natural world and become a supporter of Omnibus. It would not exist without our dedicated, loyal listeners who are, in many cases, getting pretty well compensated for their support. In this case, for example, today's show about mother trees was suggested by Norm, a washing bear level donor, I believe, if I'm remembering the order right.
Thank you, Norm. I really enjoyed it. You know, I should have said from the very beginning that my mom and sister are huge mother tree proponents.
They know the work and are...
They do. They have read the book, or her book. They have read her books. And I can recommend the film Fabulous Fungi, Fantastic Fungi, which is one of the wonderful things about fungi is that they grow in stop motion. So rather than sitting and watching mushrooms grow really slowly in your time world, just switch over into fast motion time world, and you can watch them grow and then shrink down, and they will take an apple and they'll turn it into tree food.
It would be interesting if the rhizosphere actually works just like any other kind of neural net, but it's just much slower, like a la, ant style, Fangorn Forest. So if you actually were to speed it up, that's when you could observe the phenomena that would look to us like consciousness or organization.
Yeah, exactly. We have only the ability to stop motion the fungi to a certain extent, but if we could speed that all the way up so that it went as fast as the neurons firing in our brains, maybe it would be exactly the same process. Because, not to get too woo, fractals can.
I guess this show does function as a symbiotic relationship. You are a birch tree, and I'm a fungi. No?
No. Futurelings, from our vantage point in your distant past, we have no idea how long our civilization survived. We hope and pray that the catastrophe we fear may never come. But if the worst comes soon, this recording, like all our recordings, may have been our final word. But if Providence allows, we wish you many goods and cheese and fungus and hope to be back with you soon for another entry in the Omni.